The sun of the strange planet was setting when Ryan walked through the forest. He had been alone on this world for weeks, gathering supplies and trying to keep himself alive. His small shelter stood near a river, and every day he went deeper into the forest to search for food, water, or anything useful. He was tired, but his human spirit did not allow him to give up. That evening, while moving between tall trees, he heard something unusual. It was not the sound of the wind or the cry of an animal. It was a voice, faint and weak. Ryan stopped and listened again. There it was, a cry for help. His heart beat faster. He had not heard another intelligent voice since arriving on this world. He followed the sound, pushing branches aside and moving toward a clearing. In the middle of the clearing lay the remains of a small alien shuttle. The metal was twisted, smoke rose from broken panels, and the ground was burned black. Ryan approached carefully, his eyes searching for danger. Then he saw movement inside the wreck. A figure lay half hidden beneath a piece of metal. The cry for help came again, softer this time. Ryan rushed forward. He pushed the heavy metal aside with all his strength. Under it was a young alien girl. Her skin had a light shade, her eyes large and bright with fear. She looked different from humans, yet her face showed pain in a way Ryan could understand. She was injured, her leg caught under the wreckage. "Hold on," Ryan said, even though he knew she might not understand his words. He pressed his hands against the wreck, lifted, and freed her leg. She let out a sharp sound of pain but did not pull away. Carefully, Ryan lifted her in his arms. She was light, almost weightless compared to a human. Her eyes met his, and though they spoke no common language, she seemed to realize he was not an enemy. Ryan carried her back through the forest. The path was rough, but he did not stop. The girl rested her head against his shoulder, too weak to resist. At last, he reached his small shelter near the river. It was only a simple hut built from wood and stone, but it was safe. He laid her gently on his bedroll. Her leg was bleeding. Ryan opened his small medical kit. Supplies were limited, but he cleaned the wound with water, wrapped it with cloth, and gave her a small piece of dried fruit to eat. She accepted the food with shaking hands. When she spoke, her words were soft and musical, but he could not understand them. Still, he nodded, showing her she was safe. Night fell. The stars of this alien world filled the sky, brighter than any Ryan had ever seen. Inside the shelter, the girl sat quietly, watching him with wide eyes. Ryan made a fire and boiled water. He offered her a warm drink, and though she hesitated at first, she took it. He smiled gently, trying to show he meant no harm. When he finally rested, she was still awake, her gaze fixed on him. She seemed to be studying him, wondering who he was and why he had helped her. He could not explain, but he hoped she would feel his kindness. The next morning, Ryan woke to the sound of movement. The girl was trying to stand, but her injured leg made it difficult. Ryan quickly helped her sit again. He pointed to her leg and shook his head, showing her to stay still. She looked frustrated but did not resist. Instead, she tried to speak. Her words were unknown, yet her tone was clear. She wanted to know something. Ryan answered with gestures, touching his chest and saying his name slowly. "Ryan," he said. She repeated it, not perfectly, but close enough. Then she touched her chest and said, "Nira." Ryan smiled. Now he knew her name. The days that followed were not easy. Nira's wound needed time to heal, and she often winced with pain. Ryan did his best to care for her. He went into the forest to gather food, bringing back roots, berries, and fish from the river. Sometimes Nero pointed at plants, shaking her head to warn him they were dangerous. Slowly, they began to understand each other through signs and simple sounds. Nero showed him how to prepare certain plants for medicine. She crushed leaves and pressed them against her wound, which seemed to ease her pain. Ryan was impressed. Though she was young, she clearly knew things about this planet that he did not. Each evening, they sat by the fire. Ryan would carve pieces of wood into small tools while Nero watched with curiosity. Sometimes she laughed softly when his work broke apart, and sometimes she clapped when he managed to make something useful. Her presence changed the silence of his days. For the first time in weeks, he did not feel completely alone. Yet Ryan knew something else. The wreck he had found her in was not a random accident. She must have come from somewhere. Others like her might still be out there. He wondered if they were searching for her, or if they had been lost in the crash. He kept this thought to himself, not wanting to worry her. One night, as the firelight flickered on the walls of the shelter, Nero looked at Ryan and said his name again. Then she placed her hand on her chest and whispered her own. The simple act felt like a bond, stronger than words. Ryan realized then that saving her life had given him something greater than survival. He had found a connection on this strange world. For Nira, the fear in her eyes began to fade. She no longer looked at him as a stranger. She looked at him as someone she could trust. She had been alone, hurt, and afraid, but now she had someone who had chosen to help when he could have walked away. The forest outside was vast and full of unknown dangers, but inside the shelter, two lives that came from different stars had found safety together. And so, the story of a human and an alien girl began, not with war or conflict, but with one act of rescue, one choice to save a life. The morning sun rose slowly above the forest. Its light shone through the trees, painting the river in shades of gold. Ryan sat outside his shelter, sharpening a stone blade. He looked up when he heard movement inside. Nero was trying to stand again. Her leg was still weak, but she refused to remain still. Ryan walked to her side and helped her sit down. He pointed at her leg and shook his head, telling her she needed more time. She frowned, clearly unhappy, but she obeyed. She sat on the bedroll, watching him with sharp eyes. Ryan knew she wanted to do more than just rest. She wanted to be useful. To comfort her, he handed her a piece of wood and showed her how to scrape its surface with a small sharp stone. At first she did not understand, but when he showed her again, she copied his movements. She laughed softly when she made a clean mark in the wood. Ryan smiled. It was a simple moment, but it made the shelter feel alive. During the day, Ryan went out to gather food. He left Nero with water and firewood before walking into the forest. When he returned, she was waiting by the fire. She pointed to his basket and then to the plants inside. She shook her head at some of them, then pushed aside a few berries. Ryan realized those must be poisonous. She then picked up a different root from his pile, broke it in half, and gave him a piece to taste. It was bitter but safe. In that moment, Ryan understood something important. Nero was not only his guest. She was also his teacher. She knew the forest better than he did. She could help him survive. Over the next days, they worked together. Ryan showed her how he caught fish using a simple spear. Nira clapped her hands when he caught one, then showed him how to season the meat with crushed leaves. The flavor surprised him. He had been eating plain food for weeks, but now meals tasted fresh. They shared the fish by the fire, eating slowly and learning to smile at each other's efforts. At night, they practiced words. Ryan would point at objects and say their names. "Fire," he said, pointing to the flames. Nira repeated the sound, her accent soft but clear. Then she pointed to the fire and spoke a word in her own tongue. Ryan repeated it clumsily. She laughed when he got it wrong, but she patiently corrected him. They taught each other like children learning a new game. A stone became two words, a tree became two words, and their names were the first bridge between them. Soon, they could share simple ideas. It was slow, but it gave them hope. One afternoon, Ryan noticed Nira trying to stand again. This time, she used a stick as support. Her steps were shaky, but she managed to walk a few paces outside the shelter. Ryan stayed close in case she fell. She looked at him with determination, then pointed to the forest. She wanted to go further. Ryan shook his head, but she kept insisting. Finally, he agreed to walk with her, supporting her carefully. They moved slowly, step by step, until they reached the river bank. Nira's eyes lit up when she saw the water flowing bright in the sunlight. She knelt beside it and touched the surface with her fingers. She spoke in her language, pointing to the fish that swam beneath. Ryan guessed she was telling him about the river and its life. He listened, even if he did not understand every word. The sound of her voice made the forest feel less lonely. On their way back, Nira stumbled. Ryan caught her before she fell. She laughed at her own weakness, but her eyes showed gratitude. In that moment, they were no longer strangers. They were partners in survival. As days passed, their trust grew stronger. When Ryan went hunting, Nira stayed behind to prepare herbs. She crushed plants and made small bundles for healing. She even placed some near his tools, telling him with gestures to use them if he was hurt. Ryan was touched by her care. He had saved her life, but now she was helping him in return. One night, after a long day of work, they sat by the fire. Nira tried to explain something. She drew shapes in the dirt with a stick. She drew a circle, then many small marks around it. She pointed at herself and then to the circle. Ryan watched closely, trying to understand. It seemed she was telling him about her people, about a larger group somewhere far away. Ryan wondered if her tribe was still alive. Maybe they were searching for her. Maybe they were gone. He could not know. But he saw the sadness in her eyes when she looked at the drawing. She missed her people. To comfort her, Ryan drew a shape of his own. He drew a simple star and pointed to himself. Then he drew a small hut and pointed again. He wanted to show her that this was his home now, that she was not alone. Nero looked at the drawing, then at him. Slowly, she smiled. That night, the forest was quiet. The wind moved gently through the trees, and the fire glowed warmly. Nira sat close to Ryan, her eyes heavy with sleep. Before she lay down, she spoke his name softly. It was the first time she said it without hesitation. Ryan felt a strange warmth in his chest. He realized she no longer saw him as just a stranger. She saw him as a friend. Days turned into weeks. Nira's leg grew stronger. She could walk short distances without pain. Together, they explored the forest, always careful and alert. Ryan showed her how he built traps, and she showed him which paths were safe from wild animals. They learned from each other, building a rhythm of survival. But not all signs were peaceful. Sometimes at night, Ryan noticed strange noises in the distance. The snap of a branch, the call of something that was not an animal. He kept his spear close, ready for danger. Nira also seemed uneasy at times, as if she knew something was out there. Still, during the day, they lived in peace. Their small shelter became more than just a place to hide. It became a home built on trust. Ryan had saved Nira from death, but in return, she had saved him from loneliness. The bond between them was no longer fragile. It was strong, like the roots of the giant trees that surrounded them. Two beings from different stars had learned to share food, words, and hope. And though danger waited beyond the trees, for now, they had each other. That was enough. The days of calm life by the river began to change. Ryan noticed it first when he returned from a short hunting trip. The ground near his shelter showed footprints that were not his own. They were smaller than his boots yet not shaped like any animal he had seen. At first, he thought maybe Nira had walked there, but she was still inside when he returned. She had not left the shelter at all. Ryan studied the marks carefully. They were pressed deep into the soil as if more than one figure had passed by. He frowned and tightened his grip on his spear. Something or someone was watching. That night, as the fire burned low, Nira sat close, grinding herbs with a flat stone. She looked up when Ryan's face grew serious. He pointed at the ground outside and then drew the shape of a footprint in the dirt. Her eyes widened. She whispered in her own language, her voice filled with unease. Ryan could not understand her words, but her fear was clear. She shook her head quickly and touched her chest. She knew something about these tracks. She had seen them before. The next morning, Ryan rose earlier than usual. The forest was quiet, too quiet. Birds that usually called at dawn were silent. He searched the edges of their camp, finding more signs. Branches broken, bark scraped, and stones moved aside. Someone had been watching closely. He returned to the shelter and told Nira with gestures. She looked down, her hands trembling. Then she drew in the dirt again. She drew a circle of many figures around one small shape in the middle. She pointed to herself and then to the figures. Ryan understood. Whoever was out there belonged to her kind. At first, relief touched his heart. If they were her people, then maybe it was a good sign. But Nira's worried expression told him otherwise. Something about them made her afraid. Later that day, Ryan decided to prepare. He walked into the forest with his tools and cut branches to create traps. He set up warning lines of stones and dry sticks that would break loudly if stepped on. Nira watched him with sad eyes, as if she knew the danger was greater than he imagined. By evening, the signs grew clearer. From the shadows of the trees, shapes moved. Ryan saw them only for a moment, quick and silent. He tightened his grip on his spear and stood near the fire. Nira stayed inside the shelter, her eyes wide with fear. Hours passed. The figures did not attack. They simply watched. Ryan could feel their eyes on him, heavy and sharp. He moved slowly, keeping the fire strong. He wanted to show he was ready. The night stretched on, long and tense. From the trees came whispers. They were soft, almost like the rustle of leaves, but they carried rhythm, like voices speaking to each other. Ryan could not understand, but he knew the sound was not natural. Nira covered her ears, shaking her head as if the whispers brought back memories she wished to forget. She whispered his name in a trembling voice, warning him to stay inside. But Ryan refused to hide. If danger came, he would face it. Near midnight, One of the traps snapped. A branch broke loudly, echoing in the dark. Ryan raised his spear and stood ready. The shadows shifted, and he saw glowing eyes peering from between the trees. They did not move closer, but they did not retreat either. The fire crackled. Ryan's heart beat fast, yet his hands were steady. He stared into the forest, refusing to show fear. Minutes passed like hours. Finally, the figures melted back into the darkness. The night grew silent once more. When the morning came, Nira stepped outside with him. She looked pale, but her leg was stronger now. She pointed at the forest and shook her head, then touched her chest. She tried to explain, but her words were broken. Ryan understood only a little. The shadows were not her enemies, but they were not his friends either. They were watching, deciding something. Ryan gathered more wood and sharpened his weapons. If they returned, he would be ready. Yet deep inside, he felt no wish to fight. He had seen the fear in Nira's eyes. Whoever those people were, they meant something to her. That evening, Nira surprised him. She brought him a bundle of herbs and tied them around his arm. She looked into his eyes and said his name firmly. Then she spoke in her language, her tone soft but serious. Ryan felt she was asking him for a promise. A promise not to harm her people unless he had no choice. Ryan nodded slowly. He placed his hand over his chest to show he understood. Nira sighed with relief and sat down again by the fire. For the first time, she seemed less afraid. Still, the tension in the air did not leave. Every rustle in the forest made Ryan glance sharply. Every broken twig sounded like a warning. He wondered if the watchers would come closer again, or if they were waiting for something else. That night, when the fire burned low, Ryan and Nira sat in silence. She leaned her head against the wooden wall of the shelter, tired but calmer. Ryan kept his spear in hand, staring at the forest. His instincts told him this was only the beginning. The shadows were not predators. They were people. Intelligent, cautious, and perhaps ready to test him. As the stars shone above, Ryan made a decision. He would not run. He would not leave Nira alone. If her people wanted to come, they would find him standing by her side. The forest around them was no longer just trees and rivers. It was alive with unseen eyes, waiting to step forward. And soon, they would. The morning after the restless night came with heavy clouds. The forest was damp, and the air felt thick as if the world itself held its breath. Ryan stepped outside the shelter, spear in hand. He saw no shadows, no movement, but he felt eyes on him. Nira sat near the fire, her hands gripping her knees. She had not slept much. The day passed slowly. Ryan tried to fish by the river, yet he kept looking over his shoulder. Nira joined him, walking with care on her healing leg. She watched the trees more than the water. Every sound made her tense. Ryan placed a hand on her shoulder to calm her, but her fear did not leave. As evening came, the silence broke. From the forest came a rustle, not like an animal but many feet moving together. Ryan turned quickly, his spear ready. Nira froze, her eyes wide. Shapes appeared between the trees. One figure stepped forward, then another, then more. Soon, a group of women stood at the edge of the clearing. They were tall and graceful, their skin marked with natural patterns that glowed faintly in the fading light. Each carried a staff or a spear of their own. Their eyes were sharp, studying Ryan with caution. Behind them, more figures waited, moving carefully, surrounding the clearing without stepping too close. Nira gasped and took a step forward. She raised her hands and called out in her own tongue. Her voice was full of emotion, and the group stirred at her cry. One woman stepped closer. She wore a necklace of carved stones, and her bearing marked her as a leader. She looked at Nira, then at Ryan. Nira limped forward, ignoring her wound. She spoke quickly, pointing to Ryan and then to herself. Her words tumbled out, filled with urgency. The leader listened, her face calm but serious. She glanced at Ryan again, her eyes full of questions. Ryan lowered his spear slowly and raised his empty hand to show peace. He did not move closer, but his steady stance told them he was not weak. The tribe whispered among themselves. Their voices rose and fell like a wave, and though Ryan could not understand, he knew they were deciding his place. At last, the leader raised her hand, and the others grew silent. She spoke to Nira, her tone softer than before. Nira answered, her hands moving as she explained. Then the leader stepped closer to Ryan. She looked him in the eyes and touched her chest with her hand. She spoke her name clearly. Though Ryan could not repeat it well, he tried. The leader gave a short nod. Nira smiled for the first time in many days. She pointed to Ryan and said his name proudly. The tribe murmured among themselves, testing the strange sound. The leader looked at him once more, then gestured for him to follow. Ryan hesitated. He looked at Nira, and she nodded eagerly, urging him to go. He realized this was the moment she had been waiting for. These were her people. They had found her at last. With slow steps, Ryan followed the women into the forest. Nira walked beside him, leaning on her staff. The tribe moved in silence, their steps light as if they were part of the trees. Ryan kept his eyes open, noticing how they traveled with ease through paths he had never seen. They were hunters, guardians of this place, and he was a stranger walking among them. After a long walk, the forest opened into a wide clearing hidden under giant trees. There stood their village. Houses of stone and wood rose from the ground, woven with vines and leaves. Fires burned in circles, and children played near the center. Women worked with tools, shaping baskets, grinding herbs, and repairing weapons. When they saw Nira, they cried out with joy. They ran to her, embracing her, touching her face, and speaking quickly. Nira laughed and wept at the same time. She pointed at Ryan, speaking fast, telling them what he had done. The crowd looked at him with curiosity. Some eyes were cautious, some thankful. Ryan stood tall, though he felt the weight of so many stares. The leader raised her hand again, calming the crowd. She spoke a few words, and the women stepped back, giving space. Then she gestured for Ryan and Nira to follow her deeper into the village. They entered a large shelter made of stone and carved wood. Inside, the air smelled of herbs and smoke. The leader sat on a carved seat and looked at them both. She spoke to Nira, who answered with passion, her hands moving fast. Ryan waited, listening even though he could not understand. At last, Nira turned to him. She touched his arm gently and smiled. Then she pointed to the leader and said one word in a soft voice. Friend. Ryan felt his shoulders relax. The tension of the past days eased. The tribe did not see him as an enemy. They saw him as the one who saved Nira. The leader spoke again, and other women brought food made from roasted roots and fruits. They offered it to Ryan with careful hands. He accepted, eating slowly to show respect. The food was sweet and filling, a welcome change from his simple meals. As the night grew late, the tribe gathered in the open space of the village. Fires lit the clearing, and voices rose in song. Nira sat with her people, her face glowing with happiness. She looked at Ryan often, making sure he was included. Some of the younger women approached him, pointing at his tools and asking questions with curious eyes. He showed them his knife, his spear, and how he shaped wood into sharp edges. They watched with amazement, whispering to each other. Ryan realized they were not only curious about him. They were curious about humans. His strength, his skill, and his survival alone in the forest were things they respected. When the singing ended, the leader stood and raised her hand to the stars. She spoke words that carried power and respect. Nira translated slowly, using simple gestures. The leader was thanking him for bringing Nira back and for his courage in facing the dangers of the forest. She was also inviting him to stay with them, at least for a time. Ryan looked at Nira. Her eyes shone with hope. He nodded, accepting the offer. The tribe cheered softly, not loud, but with warm voices. That night, Ryan lay in a small shelter prepared for him. He listened to the sounds of the village, the laughter, the calm voices, the beating heart of a people who had lived here for generations. For the first time since arriving on this world, he felt less like an outsider. He had saved one life, and now that life had led him to many. But in the shadows of his thoughts, Ryan knew peace was never certain. He remembered the whispers in the forest and the way Nira had trembled. The tribe welcomed him, yet he sensed challenges ahead. Still, as he closed his eyes, he felt comfort in knowing he was no longer alone. He had a place here, among Nira's people, among her tribe. And perhaps, in time, they would see that humans carried more than strength. They carried hope. The village of Nira's tribe rested beneath towering trees. The branches formed a ceiling of green, and sunlight slipped through in golden beams. Ryan walked among the people with careful steps. Everywhere he looked, women worked with skill and purpose. Some wove baskets from vines, others ground herbs into powders, and hunters sharpened their spears with stone blades. Children laughed as they played with sticks and pebbles, but even their games had the rhythm of training. Though strangers' eyes followed him, Ryan stood tall. He knew he was being judged, yet he felt no anger. These people had every reason to be cautious. He was different, unknown, a man alone among them. But he also knew he had something to offer. Nira walked beside him, her steps stronger each day. She introduced him to her people, speaking in her language, then repeating his name so they could remember. Some smiled kindly, others stayed serious, but all listened when she spoke. It was clear that her survival carried weight in the tribe. The leader, the woman with the stone necklace, watched him closely. She spoke little but observed much. Ryan respected her silence. Leadership, he thought, was not only about words but about wisdom in knowing when to speak. Ryan soon discovered the village was built with care and knowledge. Houses of wood and stone stood firm against storms. Platforms high in the trees served as watchposts. The people knew every plant and animal in the forest. They lived as part of the land, not against it. Yet, despite their harmony, he noticed gaps. Their tools were strong but simple. Their traps were clever but not as advanced as those he had built in his solitude. That evening, as the fires burned, Ryan sat with a group of hunters. They watched him shape a piece of wood with his knife. He carved quickly, his hands steady. The hunters leaned closer, whispering to one another. Nira translated softly. They wanted to know how he made such sharp edges. Ryan held up his knife, explaining through gestures that it was made of metal, not stone. He showed them how it cut through wood with ease. The hunters' eyes widened. They touched the blade carefully, respecting its strength. Though he had only one knife, he showed them how to shape wood into traps that could catch animals without constant watch. The hunters nodded, their faces bright with interest. The next day, Ryan joined the hunters in the forest. Nira insisted on coming, though her leg was still weak. They moved silently through the trees, and Ryan saw how skilled they were. They knew where to step, how to listen, and when to stop. Yet when it came to traps, they were surprised by his methods. He built snares with rope and bent branches, showing them how the weight of the animal would spring the trap closed. The hunters laughed with delight when the first trap caught a wild creature within hours. When they returned to the village with their catch, the people gathered around. Nira explained what Ryan had taught. The tribe looked at him with new respect. They saw that his knowledge could add to their own. Ryan also learned from them. One woman showed him how to weave vines into strong rope. Another taught him which plants could cure fever and which could poison a wound. He watched their dances around the fire, which told stories of battles and journeys long ago. He listened to their songs, which carried both sorrow and hope. One night, as the fire crackled, the leader approached him. She spoke slowly, her words heavy with meaning. Nira translated with care. The leader thanked him for teaching the hunters and for helping Nira survive. But she also asked why he was here, so far from his own people. Ryan looked at the stars above. He could not explain everything in words they would understand. He simply placed his hand on his chest and said, "Alone." Then he pointed to Nira and to the tribe around him. "Not alone now." The leader studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded, her eyes softening. She placed her hand on his shoulder, a gesture of respect. In the days that followed, the bond between Ryan and the tribe grew. Children followed him, eager to see his tools and hear his strange words. Women asked him to show them new ways to shape wood or sharpen stones. The hunters invited him to join their patrols. Ryan found himself smiling more often. For the first time since landing on this world, he felt part of something larger than his own survival. Yet not all was peace. One evening, as he sharpened his spear, Ryan noticed Nira watching the forest edge with troubled eyes. He walked to her side and asked with a look what worried her. She whispered in her tongue, then drew in the dirt. She drew figures with different shapes, taller and heavier than her people. She pointed at them, then at the village, then shook her head with fear. Ryan understood. There were others beyond the forest, not from her tribe, and they were dangerous. Perhaps raiders, perhaps hunters of another kind. Nira's hand trembled as she finished the drawing. Ryan placed his hand over hers to calm her. He nodded firmly. If such a threat came, he would not let harm reach her or her people. That night, he worked late, shaping more traps and strengthening his spear. The tribe watched quietly, sensing his seriousness. Nira sat beside him, her eyes full of trust. Though the village had given him peace, Ryan now knew it stood on the edge of danger. The shadows he had felt in the forest were only the beginning. Soon, he would need to prove himself again, not just as a guest, but as a protector. For now, though, the fires of the village glowed warm. The people laughed and sang, and Ryan listened with a heart that no longer felt empty. He had been alone, wandering a strange world, but now he stood among allies. He had found a place, not by force, but by trust. And in that trust, he found strength. The morning began with calm skies. Birds called from the high branches, and the tribe's children laughed as they chased each other through the open space of the village. Yet beneath the light mood, an unease settled among the hunters. They had seen tracks in the forest, tracks that did not belong to any animal. Ryan stood at the edge of the village, examining the ground. The prints were larger than a human's foot, heavier, and made by boots or something close to it. He knelt, touched the soil, and could tell they were fresh. Whoever had left them was close. Nira joined him, her face pale. She did not need to speak. Ryan understood her fear. These were the figures she had drawn in the dirt. Raiders or outsiders, ones who might bring harm. The leader called the tribe together. Her voice was steady, but her eyes carried worry. Nira translated for Ryan. The outsiders had been seen before, but never so near. They came from far away, taking food and resources by force. They had strength and weapons. The tribe avoided them, but now it seemed avoidance would no longer be enough. Ryan listened quietly, then stepped forward. He could not speak their language, yet his actions carried weight. He took his spear, struck the earth with its tip, and lifted his head with resolve. "Fight," he said, the single word clear enough for all to understand. The tribe murmured. Some looked uneasy, but others nodded with fire in their eyes. They were not cowards. They had defended themselves before, but this time, with Ryan's help, they had a chance to prepare better. That night, Ryan began working. He showed the hunters how to set traps not only for animals but for enemies. Snares across narrow paths, pits covered with leaves, branches weighted to swing down with force. He explained through gestures that these would slow the enemy and scatter their strength. The hunters copied his movements, their hands steady and determined. Nira helped him communicate, moving from group to group, making sure every person understood the plan. Her voice carried confidence, though Ryan could see the worry in her eyes. She trusted him, and he could not fail her trust. Over the next days, the village changed. The women who usually gathered herbs now carried sharpened sticks. The hunters patrolled the forest edges, alert to every sound. The children were guided to safe hiding places, where caves and tree hollows would shield them if danger came. Ryan worked without rest. He shaped wooden shields, taught the tribe how to hold them in a line, and showed them how to thrust spears together. He explained that unity was their strength. Alone, each fighter could be outmatched, but together, they would form a wall that even stronger foes would find hard to break. One evening, as they trained, a scout ran into the village, breathing hard. She spoke quickly, her voice sharp with alarm. Nira translated at once. The enemy was near. The leader gave orders swiftly. Fires were dimmed, voices hushed, weapons readied. The village waited in tense silence. Ryan stood among them, spear in hand, knife at his belt, his heart steady. He had faced storms, hunger, and loneliness, but this would be different. This was not a fight for himself alone. This was for Nira, for the tribe, for the people who had given him a place. Night fell, and with it came movement in the trees. Shadows slipped between trunks, heavy steps pressed the ground. Then came the glow of strange torches, carried by tall figures with harsh voices. Ryan watched carefully. The raiders were larger than the tribe's people, their bodies wrapped in armor of leather and bone. They carried clubs, axes, and long spears. Their faces were marked with paint that gave them a fierce look. There were more than 20 of them. The tribe hid in silence, waiting for Ryan's signal. When the raiders entered the path lined with traps, Ryan gave a sharp whistle. At once, vines pulled tight, logs swung down, and a pit opened beneath the raiders' feet. Cries of shock filled the night as several fell. The hunters rushed forward with spears. Ryan joined them, his movements swift and precise. He thrust his spear into one raider's side, then pulled it free to strike again. The tribe fought with courage, their unity strong. Shields locked together, spears flashing, voices rising in shouts of defiance. The raiders pushed hard, their strength great, but they found themselves slowed and confused by traps they had not expected. One swung his axe at Ryan, but he ducked low and struck the man's leg, sending him to the ground. Another tried to break through the shield wall, but the tribe held firm, stabbing together until the raider fell. In the chaos, Nira fought as well. Though her leg was not fully healed, she stood with a spear, guarding the children hidden nearby. Her eyes burned with courage. The battle raged through the night. Step by step, the raiders lost ground. Their numbers fell, their confidence shaken. The tribe, once quiet and cautious, now roared with strength. They were not prey. They were protectors of their home. At last, the raiders fled, dragging their wounded with them. Their torches vanished into the dark forest, their voices fading. The tribe did not chase. They had defended what was theirs. Silence returned to the village, broken only by the sound of heavy breaths. The leader stepped forward, raising her arms high. A cheer rose from the tribe, loud and proud. Ryan stood among them, his spear stained, his body weary but unbroken. Nira came to him, her face filled with relief. She spoke softly, and though he did not know the words, he understood their meaning. Gratitude. Trust. Hope. The tribe had faced danger and survived. They had not done it alone. Ryan's knowledge had guided them, but their courage had carried them through. In that moment, they were not strangers and guests. They were one people, bound by battle and trust. As the fires were lit again, and the tribe gathered to tend the wounded and celebrate their survival, Ryan looked to the stars. He thought of the life he had lost, the loneliness that had once weighed on him. Now, he felt none of it. He had found purpose. He had found family. But in his heart, he knew this was not the end. The raiders would remember this defeat. They would return one day, stronger and angrier. And when they did, he would be ready. For now, though, he stood with pride, a human who had saved not just one alien girl, but an entire tribe. The battle was over, but the memory of it stayed in the hearts of the tribe. The village carried both relief and sadness. The fires burned low as the people sat together, tending wounds, sharing food, and whispering stories of courage. Some hunters had cuts and bruises, but none were lost. That alone was a victory worth remembering. Ryan sat near the edge of the fire circle, his spear resting by his side. His body was tired, yet his eyes stayed sharp. He watched as the tribe worked together with steady hands, comforting the children and caring for the injured. They were strong, not just in battle, but in spirit. Nira came to him with a bowl of warm broth. She knelt beside him and offered it with a smile. Her face showed both exhaustion and pride. Ryan took the bowl with quiet thanks. As he ate, she spoke softly, telling him how the tribe now saw him as more than a guest. He was a protector, a brother, a part of their story. The leader of the tribe, wearing her stone necklace, approached soon after. She stood tall, her presence commanding respect. The tribe grew quiet as she raised her hand. Her voice carried across the gathering, steady and strong. Nira translated for Ryan. The leader said the tribe had faced danger and survived because of unity and courage, but also because of the knowledge Ryan had shared. She declared that he was no longer an outsider. He was welcome as one of them. The tribe cheered, their voices rising together. Ryan felt a warmth in his chest that no fire could match. For so long he had lived alone, surviving in silence. Now he had people who looked to him not as a stranger, but as family. The next days were filled with rebuilding. The traps in the forest were reset and improved. New fences were built around the village, stronger than before. Hunters practiced daily with spears and shields, repeating the lessons Ryan had taught. The women gathered herbs and stored food in larger amounts, preparing for the chance of another raid. Ryan helped in every task. He carved tools, shaped weapons, and repaired shelters. He showed the children how to build small snares and how to find safe paths in the forest. The children laughed when he demonstrated, eager to copy him. For the first time in a long while, Ryan found joy not only in survival but in teaching. Nira often walked with him. She asked questions about his world, though she knew he could not answer all of them. He told her simple stories of the stars, pointing upward at night. She listened with wide eyes, as though the sky itself was opening before her. She told him stories of her tribe's ancestors, how they once crossed rivers and mountains to find this forest. Their voices, human and alien, blended into something new. One evening, Ryan stood with the leader as they looked out over the village. The fires glowed warmly, and laughter echoed through the trees. The leader spoke in her calm voice, and Nira translated. She said the tribe would always face challenges, but now they were stronger because they had chosen not to live in fear. She told Ryan that his coming was more than chance. It was a turning point for them. Ryan bowed his head, humbled. He had not come here seeking glory or power. He had simply saved a girl, then chosen to stay. Yet that small choice had changed everything. But though peace returned, Ryan remained watchful. He knew the raiders had not been defeated forever. They would return with anger, perhaps in greater numbers. He told the hunters this truth, and they agreed. They would train harder, prepare more traps, and stand ready. Weeks passed, and the village grew even closer. The people sang songs of the battle, adding Ryan's name to their verses. Children ran through the paths calling his name in play. Women asked him to show them how to carve wood or strengthen their tools. Even the leader shared her thoughts with him at the fire, treating him as an equal. Ryan had once thought himself a wanderer without a place, but now he felt rooted. The forest no longer seemed foreign. The voices of the tribe no longer seemed strange. Their way of life had become his own. One morning, Nero led him to a quiet clearing near the river. She told him this was where the tribe came to give thanks to the land. She asked him to place his hand in the water and speak his wish. Ryan did so, closing his eyes. He wished not for himself but for the safety of the people who had accepted him. When he opened his eyes, Nira smiled. She said his wish was the same as hers. As the sun rose higher, painting the sky with light, Ryan stood with her in silence. The sound of the river, the whisper of leaves, the call of birds, all felt like part of one great song. He understood then that home was not where you were born but where you were needed. That night, the tribe held a feast. They roasted meat, shared fruits, and sang under the stars. The leader raised her voice, speaking of the battle, the courage of the people, and the bond they now shared with Ryan. Nira translated, though the meaning was clear even without words. Ryan looked around the circle of faces glowing in firelight. He saw trust, friendship, and hope. His heart, once heavy with loneliness, now felt full. When the songs ended and the fire burned low, Ryan sat quietly, looking at the stars above. He thought of his old life, the world he had lost, and the journey that had brought him here. It no longer felt like a tragedy. It felt like a path that had led him to this moment. He was no longer just a man surviving. He was part of a people, part of a story greater than his own. The future would bring challenges, but he no longer faced them alone. Together with Nira and her tribe, he would meet whatever came. As dawn approached once more, Ryan rose and stood at the edge of the village. The first light touched the trees, golden and warm. He breathed deeply, feeling the air of a new day. This was his home now. His place. His purpose. And he would protect it, always.